right here. What an awesome pass through the slot, onto the stick of Batherson. Kachuk in tight up, let's get going, scores! Brady Kachuk wins it in overtime for Ottawa.
All right, everybody, welcome. We are joined here with Derek Lee, a Future Watch brought to you by Dine Sports. Derek, thank you so much for joining the show today once again.
Man, thanks for having me. It's the middle of the summer. There's not a lot happening in terms of hockey, but I couldn't be happier to be sitting here talking about the draft, which is less than a week away. I'm super excited.
It's on Thursday, less than a few days away, and I saved this important episode as we go through the Senators draft preview. We're going to look at the first round. Ottawa has the 7th overall pick, and then we're going to look at the later round picks. Look, Ottawa has 9 selections after the first round. That is kind of absurd to think about. A lot of options going on there, a lot of scenarios that can play out. Well, let's get into it then. Look, like I just said, Ottawa has the 7th overall pick going into the 2022 NHL entry draft in Montreal, by the way, La Belle Province. Montreal has the 1st overall pick. That's going to be real interesting to see. Shane Wright, you're off Slafkovsky. Who do they take? I'm leaning towards Shane Wright. I think they're going to go for center. We'll see. But Ottawa has 7th overall. And, look, are we even sure Ottawa is going to select 7th overall on Thursday night? I bring up Montreal because Bruce Garriock and Elliot Freeman have reported that the Montreal Canadiens are looking to trade for another top 10 pick in this draft. They have contacted the Ottawa Senators. So Montreal potentially might be in play to trade the 7th overall pick. Then you also have an option where, look, some people like Bruce Garriock, I believe, have been saying that Matt Murray might be dealt with the 7th overall pick attached to him. But today on Sportsnet Central, Elliot Freeman has reported that it's not necessary that the Senators will have to trade 7th overall with Matt Murray. So that's good news, where Ottawa can potentially keep the 7th overall selection while also trading Matt Murray and getting his cap space off of the books. So Derek Lee, what do you think are the odds of Ottawa trading the draft pick before Thursday night, or at least on Thursday night?
Well, it's never something you want to put a lot of stock into, because I think, when you're up in the top 10, it's pretty rare to see a trade inside the top 10. It doesn't happen very often. But there's been enough smoke to suggest that there could be fire this season. And this season in particular, because I think Pierre Dorion probably realizes, and through his exit interviews as well, we've heard rumblings of, Thomas Chabot and Brady Tkachuk not being entirely happy with the on-ice product and really wanting to see an improvement this season. Last season, their biggest move was probably Michael Del Zotto. So they have to do something a lot more substantial this season. And it's been forever rumored. I mean, a lot of it was circling around Kevin Fiala, which, he's gone to LA now, but there's still rumor there. There's enough smoke to be fired that to suggest that there is a possibility this season where the Senators do move the 7th overall pick. But I think it's going to take, one of those positional needs to really make that happen for a trade to work out. And it might happen on the draft floor. So I'm excited to see how it plays out. Right now, I put it at probably 60-40. 60, they make the pick. 40, they make the trade.
Well, I also want to add on to that Elliot Freeman report from today on Sportsnet Central. He mentioned as well, and I don't think this is much of a shocker, but he mentioned that the 7th overall pick is in play for a right-handed defenseman or a right winger, which obviously both are of need for the Ottawa Senators. So we will see. Hopefully as this video is recorded, they don't make a trade, because that'd be a little awkward. But we'll see before Thursday night, or like you said, on Thursday night, whether or not that pick will be in play and or whether or not they will use that pick to make a selection. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really, really interesting. And I just want to mention one more thing with Connor Brown probably electing to, test free agency at the end of next season. That's also a factor to consider here, where they may want to bring in more immediate top 6 talent to help Tim Stützle on that second line. But now I want to transition back to the draft, because, let's just assume the Ottawa Senators select with 7th overall. Like you just said, it's more likely than not that they do. So what positions are the biggest needs for the Ottawa Senators in this draft?
Well, we could start with right shot defenseman, just because, Thomas Chabot has needed a true D partner, number 1 D partner for so long. And because there are 2 of them at the top, it makes it really interesting. So I'll start with right shot D as an area that, we've long coveted as Sens fans.
Yes.
An area that we've circled and said, Thomas Chabot really needs a D partner. But it's maybe less substantiated now that we're going to see the arrival of Jake Sanderson. I know he's a left shot D, but it is going to take some of that burden off Chabot You already have Zub there.
Yeah.
So the question really becomes, is Travis Hamonic a guy who you want to play with Jake Sanderson for his first season in the NHL? Or, could he play, top line minutes with Thomas Chabot at this stage in his career? And I'm not so sure that, I feel super confident in that. So I think that's a positional need still. But really, I mean, you want to elevate your future number one center in Tim Stützle with a nice complementary winger. And I think, as great as Alex Formenton was this season, he's a guy who, he's a guy who brings a ton to the table. I think they need more quality around Tim Stützle. You could, take Drake Batherson and move him down and give him Batherson, but then it takes away from that top line.
Exactly.
So they really need to clone Drake Batherson, which is impossible. So that's what leads me to believe they need a right winger or a right shot defenseman. But then I play with the idea, do they really need a right winger, or could they use a left winger? If you could mix and match those line combinations. And we still don't know what Matthew Joseph is as of yet, for the Ottawa Senators. So to me, it's a top six forward and a top four defenseman, which the team has clearly outlined that they need.
I do want to say I'm a big believer in Lassie Thompson. In his short time with Ottawa last year with Thomas Chabot, his two-way game was fantastic. Great outlet passes. I remember a great pass, I think, to Tyler Ennis, end-to-end pass. I mean, he has good vision in the back end, and he's also a steady partner for Tom Chabot. He is young, and I understand Ottawa's reluctancy to put two youngsters in that top four. I understand it, but I think Lassie Thompson is pretty mature for his age, especially when it comes to his play. And I think if Ottawa doesn't make any moves, I'm more than comfortable seeing Thompson on that first pair with Chabot, because Chabot himself can carry Thompson, but I don't think Thompson needs to be carried. And then that second pairing, you got Zub, one of the best defensive defensemen in the National Hockey League, with Jake Sanderson to help him, nourish him, and make him into a star that we hope he will become. Now, like you said, Ottawa needs right wingers. Claude Giroux might be in play. Elliot Freeman on Sportsnet Central. I know I've mentioned Sportsnet Central quite a bit in this video, but he put a little bit of a bombshell this morning. He said that Ottawa is a possible location for Claude Giroux, but he will have to test or look at free agency as well. So it's a possibility. It's not impossible, but we will see on that. So like you said, Ottawa definitely still needs to fill that hole. It's no guarantee that Claude Giroux will be signed by the Ottawa Senators. So Derek, who are some guys you can see the Ottawa Senators taking, especially in the forward position?
So at seventh overall, you're asking who? Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole slew of players, really. I mean, that talent tier, the way I have it ranked, I can see basically right after 6, from 7 down to about 14. They're all kind of in that same talent tier. So there's a whole slew of players they could look at. I don't think a defenseman is a possibility, although that would be the dream scenario. Yeah. If one of those guys, and I'm talking about David Jiricek and Simon Nemec, the two top defensemen in this class, they're both right shot guys, and they both bring a whole lot to the table and project as, first line D partners. They'd be perfect. Either of them would be perfect. I think Jiricek a little bit more than Nemec for Chabot.
Why so?
He's got the size. He's got a little bit more raw skill, where, I mean, Nemec is a little bit closer to his ceiling, I would say right now. He's a point producer. Nemec, you can't argue with the production. He broke a whole bunch of records this season in terms of production, where Jiricek had an injury in the middle of the season, kind of derailed him. But in terms of raw skill, I mean, Jiricek's the better skater. He's the much bigger guy, the much more physical guy, and he has an absolute, like, Evan Bouchard-esque cannon from the point. So I think he brings a lot to the table. Both guys play with risk. There's no question about it. So they're not refined defensemen. Like, if Jake Sanderson was in this class, he would be the number one defenseman off the board, bar down, just because he brings both elements there and he's much more defined, where these guys have a lot more kinks to work out in terms of their positioning and their IQ and things like that. But
I do want to ask you, we were speaking before the video started. I just want to make it clear to the people watching this. It's not likely Ottawa gets those guys. They're probably going to go in the top 5, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, to make a long-winded answer short, it's very unlikely that Nemec or Jiricek slide. Now, I do think Philly is a team that could take a forward. So Columbus is always a bit of a wild card. They're at number 6. If they take another forward, then it leaves you with the potential, the dream scenario potential of getting one of those two guys. But realistically, let's talk about, in more detail, the players that Ottawa could be going for at 7th overall. So first and foremost, I call him my draft baby, and that's because this is a player that I laid my eyes on first and really sort of got me excited about this upcoming draft because he has so much pop and dynamism to his game. And I'm talking about Joakim Kemell from the Liga. He's a pure shooter in the purest form. He just has an unbelievable shot. I've got a top 10 snipers video out on Dine Sports if you want to go check it out. But I have him number 1, spoiler alert, on that list because his shot is just insane. And I think it would be so much fun to see him with a Timmy Stützle feeding him the puck because it would just be an ideal fit for the Senators. Now, another fit, and it's kind of an underrated fit because a lot of people have this guy later on, like I've seen him as low as 20 on some people's lists. And I'm talking about Austrian forward. He is listed as a center in Marco Kasper, but he's drawn a lot of attention, especially around that 7th overall pick to Ottawa. And I know some NHL scouts are going to be salivating at this guy because he has the most projectable skill in the draft. Meaning like everything this guy does, he plays in the Swedish Hockey League for one, which is one of the best leagues outside the NHL. Yes. And he already plays a nasty sort of physical power forward type game. And he brings a lot of projectable skills to the table. He's great at deflecting pucks. He doesn't shy away from the front of the net. In fact, he causes tons of havoc in front of the net. He's good at banging in garbage. He has really good hands in front. And on top of it, he does have upside. And that's where people sort of differentiate when it comes to this player. Does he have enough upside to be considered a top 10, let alone top 7 player in the draft? I think he does have enough. He has the projectability, he has the upside, and he has the size at 6'1", nearly 200 pounds. So for me, he's a guy who's not that far from the NHL, maybe a year away, maybe a couple of years if you want to be really safe, but he does project as a a top 6 winger or center at the NHL level. And
I do want to note that the Ottawa 67s did select Kasper in the import draft. So he would be 67's, property if he were to go to the CHL, if he wasn't in the National Hockey League next year, which is very key because the 67s are, of course, in the same city as the Ottawa Senators. So, I mean, just kind of like Tyler Boucher, which I'm sure, Derek Lee, you're a big fan of, as I can see above your shoulder. Tyler Boucher, Marco Kasper, 2 Sens prospects with the 67s organization. That'd be really good, not only for the fact that you can go watch them live in person and to see the Sens 2 first-round picks there, but also just for the organization to keep a close tab on some top prospects they've drafted. So that's also a little bit of an interesting note with Kasper.
And yeah, sorry, Brandon, I really wanted to add the one part of Kasper's game, which I find the absolute best, which is his competitiveness. I think he's the most competitive player in this entire draft. He wins, you go into the combine. I mean, I don't know how much stock you put into the combine. It's a little silly, really. But the VO2 max test, first place, the Wingate test, I think tied for first place, like all of these competitions, you could see just how competitive this guy is. And then when I went into the video, like he does not quit on any play. He's battling it out, winning his puck battles. And remember, this is a 17-year-old playing in the Swedish Hockey League, one of the best leagues amongst bigger, stronger players. He's not falling off his feet when he's getting hit. He's throwing huge body checks. This is a guy that scouts are going to love.
I jotted down 3 players that we kind of keyed in on. I want to start with Conor Geekie. Look, just like the 2 defensemen on the right side that you already mentioned, it's not really likely that he's going to be selected there at 7. He's likely going to be selected before 7th overall. Like you mentioned before, or you mentioned when we were speaking before, the Flyers at 5, that looks like a good possible spot for Conor Geekie because, look, he's a right winger. He's 6'2", 190 pounds to 200 pounds. Every website I saw had different weights for him, so doesn't really matter. He's in that size frame, which means he's a big body, which, of course, the Flyers love. Ottawa, DJ Smith, they would love it as well. But look, with the U.S. National Development Program, 34 goals, 65 points, absolutely insane. Jeff Zvadbada of the NHL.com said on June 27th, he boasts excellent size, which allows him to play a physical game. But make no mistake, this guy can score with a rocket of a shot with his size and speed. And speed is key for a guy that big. Speed is not exactly known for guys that are bigger and taller. So having a good skating ability will definitely help him transition to the National Hockey League game. But with that speed, he can be a power forward with a scoring touch at the NHL level. And while he's listed as a wing by Central Scouting, like you already mentioned, Derek, he can potentially shift over to center as well. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about Cutter Gauthier, Locked On Standards, great show that they got there. They keep on discussing Cutter Gauthier in their mock drafts. And once again, like they said themselves, it's unlikely, but hey, it's definitely possible, and he would fit exactly what the Ottawa Sounders are looking for. So what do you like about Cutter Gauthier?
I like a lot of things about Cutter Gauthier. I think, I did break him down in a prospect video. If you want sort of in-depth stuff, you can go and check that out again at Dine Sports. I hate to keep hitting on that, but Gauthier was one of my favorite prospects. I love the size speed combo. And it's just the variety in which he scores goals. Yes, he has a big shot. He can score from the outside, but a lot of his goals actually come from that home plate area. And he's a guy that battles it out in front as well. And then you bring the speed factor in. He's an excellent skater. I mean, his first few strides are insanely powerful. I would wager as powerful as anybody in this draft.
Wow.
His speed to the outside, just as impressive. He can take on defenders wide, no problem. He has hands that complement that speed as well. Now, there's going to be a few things everyone needs to work on. I think his shot selection is not perfect. There's areas where I watch where he has an ability to make a play and he chooses to take a low percentage shot on net. You could say the same thing about many of the goal scorers in this draft, Rutger, Kemell. They need to work on shot selection and trying to fight through as opposed to taking something from the perimeter, which is a little bit easier. And then his pass reception this year, which I know a few scouts have hit on. I don't think it's as bad as scouts are talking about, but he does tend to bobble some pucks when he's receiving passes in the neutral zone, specifically when he's in stride. But everyone's going to have things to work on. I love the total package of this kid. A little bonus stat too. He has 34 goals this season, as you mentioned. Just 4 of them came on the man advantage. So this is a guy who can score a plethora of goals at 5-on-5, which I think is a bit of a rarity for a guy who has the shot that Cutter Gauthier does have. You primarily see, like we see with Josh Norris, 90% of his production is coming on the man advantage, where Cutter Gauthier is a guy who is great in transition and can score at 5-on-5 just as well.
So adding on to what you said, Derek, look, when I look at a prospect, I look for a prospect that's able to skate well and that's able to play physically well. If you have both of those to your game, you're going to be able to transition to the National Hockey League. It always happens, always. Those are the 2 toughest facets for a player's game to transition over to the National Hockey League. If you got those down to pat and they're able to transition over to the NHL game, like you said, Derek, everything else is able to just transition over and you're able to learn. Look at like Craig Anderson, for example, late bloomer. No one really knew about him. He had the fundamentals though, and he just had to develop a few other things. Now he's one of the best goaltenders for our generation, frankly. 300 plus wins. 2012 probably would have won the Vezina if he didn't cut his hand to cutting chicken. So, I mean, that's just a weird example, but a good example of how if you have the skills and you have the key elements to your position that makes it a good player in the National Hockey League, you're going to succeed. And Gauthier has all of that. Now, I want to transition over to something really interesting because, Derek, you're a draft expert. That's why you're on the show today. You have a good idea of who's in this draft, who's underrated, who's overrated, who's, in the middle there. Who do you think Ottawa might take who might not exactly pan out like other players available?
Yeah, that's perfectly worded because I have a few listed in that, potential Sens picks that I think would certainly, in my opinion, not be a very good selection at 7th overall. Excuse me. And I'll start with Conor Geekie of the Winnipeg Ice. He's a player that I've been very harsh on. I'll say that for the majority of this season. He's a player that he does have a great skill set. Like he's a big center. He's 6'4", definitely has some projectability there. He has great vision. I would say, close to elite vision. He has an okay shot. I would say it's not a big strength of his. And his hands are sick. Like he does have nasty hands. I'll give him credit for all of those things. But what scares me, Brandon, about Conor Geekie, a player by the name of Logan Brown that you might be familiar with, he just kind of projects exactly like Logan Brown, where he's a big player, really struggles with his mobility, and the struggles are mechanically. So, I mean, there's going to have to be a lot of changes mechanically to his skating just to project him at the NHL level, just to put him in your lineup.
That
His
alone,
pace.
that alone
Yeah.
scares me, Derek. I mean, I hate to cut you off, but once again, especially when you're looking at a forward position, defense, goaltender, and not a lot of people know this, but if you're a goalie, you honestly have to be the best skater on the team because of the physical demands of the position itself. But when you look at a forward, especially when you're looking at a winger or a center look, if you're not able to skate, you can't keep up. Look at McKinnon out there. I mean, holy cow! Connor McDavid, Alex Formanton, even there's so much speed out there. You've got to be able to keep up, and if you can't, you're going to fall off a little bit, like a Logan Brown, for example. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, my senses are telling me that, although he does have a skill set that would put him in the top 6 range, with that skating in there, it really does make him more of a top 9 player for me than a top 6. I would comfortably say down the road, he could be, on a third line, maybe as a winger, probably not as a center. He's not a player who's going to project very well down the middle. Just because of that skating, I don't think he's going to have, the pace that will allow him to play down the middle. But again, if you're looking for a solid top 9 player, sure. I'd be happy with this player if you're in the late teens to 20s. Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I'd start thinking about Conor Geekie. If I'm in the late teens to 20s, there is that upside that, if he's able to overhaul the skating, or if his hockey IQ, like a Mark Stone, which is, the one in a million sort of player. And a lot of people throw this in my face. A lot of people will say, oh, well, why are you so low on Geekie? If his hockey sense is good, he could be a Mark Stone. How many Mark Stones do you know? I only know one.
Yeah, honestly, you're right. I mean, there's not many players in the National Hockey League. It was known. He was a late round pick. It was known that he wasn't potentially not even going to get drafted into the National Hockey League because of his skating alone. So it really takes a hockey mind to be able to overcome that skating ability, which is exactly like you said, why there's only one Mark Stone. Now, like you said, it's not impossible for him, to overcome these things, learn and fix his mechanics to shift over to the National Hockey League game. It's not impossible. It's likely, he's a top 32 pick in the National Hockey League. I'd say it's more likely than not 100%. He's going to be a good NHL player. But it's definitely when you have a top 10 pick, you want to take a swing at somebody, but you also don't want to take a big swing. You want to make sure you take a swing, but you're going to make contact at least. And, I don't, with Geekie, like you said, it's a little.
And the thing for me, Brandon, is what's Geekie's upside versus some of these other guys we just talked about where, we're talking about Kemell, even Lekkerimaki, like some of those players. I see them as having more projectability and more upside. So I'm not sure why you would take a swing like you suggested on a player like Geekie at 7th overall. I mean, there could be something in his game that I'm missing that they really like. So, I'm open-minded, I think, at this stage, at this point in my life and looking at prospects, I'm open-minded. I've went back to the tapes on Geekie so many times to try to like him, to try to find that it factor. I can't find it right now. And a similar player, to give you another name, really similar in the way it kind of works out, in that skating is his area of weakness, but he does everything else superbly well. And that's Rutger McGroarty. And that's another name that's probably been linked mostly by Sens fans to the Senators in that 7th overall spot. He's from the program, the USN TDP. So there's just a lot of reasons that they would take this player. He plays like a power forward. He's not huge. He's 6 feet, 200 pounds, but he plays like a power forward style. But he also blends it with skill, and he has a really good shot. He has good finishing ability, but his skating, oh man, his skating is really bad. Specifically, like that ankle mobility, he just doesn't really have the mechanics down, and it would take an overhaul, a complete overhaul, for me to say with confidence that he's going to be a top 6 player at the NHL level. So again, I'm looking at these guys who some people do have higher up on their lists, and I'm just too hesitant to suggest that they're going to be top 6 players. Whereas some of these other guys, like the players that we mentioned, the Lekkerimmäkis, the Kemells, the Gautiers, the Savoies. I'm much more confident in their ability to become high-end players at the NHL level.
I want to add one thing, and I also want you to talk a little bit about Savoie, because we haven't actually spoken about him in this video, and I think that's also another intriguing option for Ottawa at 7. But look, with Kemell, this is kind of like the guy that I want Ottawa to take. I know he's a little short, if Gauthier is not available. If he's available, he's my dream pick because he's everything Ottawa would need in their top 6. Bring some grit, would complement that second line like Brady does for the first line. But Kemell, he's 5'10", he's a little 5'10", 5'11", he's a little shorter, 176, 180 pounds. But look, he's a right winger and he plays hard. He's physical. And, you love to see that, especially with these shorter type of players. A pesky type of feeling comes from Kemell to me. I think he's going to be one of those pesky type of players, and Ottawa is building a good group of those. You got Tkachuk, you got Formanton, you got Parker Kelly. The list goes on for pesky players in the Sens organization right now. So Kemell, in my opinion, if you're a shorter type of guy, in my opinion, you got a chip on your shoulder. You want to prove some doubters wrong, and he's definitely not afraid to get into those battles too. So that's a player that I would love Ottawa to take. But why don't you talk to us a little bit about Savoie, and then we'll talk about the later rounds of this draft.
I have Matthew Savoie at number 5 on my list, just to give you an idea of how much I love the kid.
Wow.
Now, he's the player that I would say is most likely to slide a little bit. But again, I don't know what Philly's going to do, and that's where I hesitate. I'm like, is Philly going to go with size with Gauthier, or are they going to go with the undersized guy in Savoie who has the upside of, maybe like a Mitch Marner or, some real significant upside. In fact, I would put Savoie's upside right up there with the top 3 guys in this draft. Wow. I would say with Cooley, Slafkovsky, and Wright, I would say Savoie's upside is right there. A lot less projectability.
Right there.
And that's what gets you, right? And that's what moves him down a little bit. And that's where NHL scouts are going to look at his size and also transferable skill, something they call transferable skill. Savoie is a great goal scorer. He has an unbelievable shot, but he scores a lot of his goals on the power play and a lot of his goals in transition. So when you're looking at transferability, how much of those goals, and scouts do this, they do a measurement, how much of these goals can you project at the next level? Yeah. And the number starts to shrink a little bit for Savoie. But in my mind, I mean, you said the same thing at the draft for Mitch Marner and some of these smaller statured players. Okay, as a center, maybe I don't like Savoie at 5th overall. But if you project him as a winger, I would put him ahead of any other winger in this draft, aside from Slafkovsky.
By the way, Slafkovsky, I know we were talking speaking during the Olympics. That kid, I mean, he really grew on me. It's kind of unfortunate that Ottawa is not going to be able to take him, but that kid, I'm telling you, I think that's going to be the next great European winger. I think he's going to be a star. I'm telling you, I love his size, but I just love the how he goes after it on the puck. I mean, no one was knocking him off. He was playing against adults, and he was impossible to knock the puck off of. So that kid is going to be unreal. And honestly, if Montreal takes him at 1, I've seen Shane Wright play in person. He's a solid player too, but it's definitely not a mistake to take him. But now let's move on to, thank you. Like you said during the Olympics, the kid's a stud. I mean, he really rose up, the rankings for draft experts like Bob McKenzie put him at 1st overall on his final list. So that says all you need to know about the kid. But I want to look later in the draft now. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, Ottawa's 9 selections after the 1st round. It's very likely Ottawa is going to use some of those picks to make a trade, whether it's not for top 6 or in a larger package or one of those smaller trades you see during the draft. There will be trades made, 100%, 9 picks after the 1st round. Unreal. But what are some prospects later in the draft you would love to see the Ottawa Senators select with those picks?
Well, there's prospects I would love to see them pick, and then there's prospects that I can see them picking. So I think they're 2 different categories, only because, and I'll admit this myself, I have a really strong skill bias. So I have a leniency towards skill, and it's probably over the top a little bit. So I look at, some of the later players and we can get into them maybe a little bit later, but in terms of who the Senators will likely select, I have a player like Noah Warren. If he's sitting there at 39th overall, I mean, you could pretty much write his name right now down. He's a 6'5", 220-pound right shot defenseman for the Gatineau Olympique. Yeah, you could chalk that one down at 39th right now, and I would be very confident in that selection. Now, is he a point producer? Not really. He does have decent and maybe even better than decent mobility, though, for a 6'5" frame. So as long as he doesn't grow anymore, I think he's already accustomed to playing in his body and playing in his frame, which is a big plus for a big defenseman who does play a big, heavy game. So, if you're looking for that type of defenseman, I think that's a player who fits the bill. And then if you go later in the draft, we know that the Senators like hockey bloodlines, Brandon. So I've got Cole Knuble, who happens to be the son of former NHLer Mike Knuble. He's a right winger. He's not a big guy. He's 5'10", 174 pounds. You could look for him in that, I would say, 65 to 75 range. So I think they pick at 65 and they pick at 72, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so he's going to be there.
So
likely
he'll be in that range. They could pick him with one of those picks. And I would not be shocked at all if they did. And of course, he plays in the program, the development program. Yeah. So that's another tie to the Senators where they prototypically pick from. And the last name I'll put in this list of Sens picks is Jorian Donovan, who is the son of current Sens player development coach Sean Donovan, former Ottawa Senator Sean Donovan.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another player that for me, I actually have a bet with someone on who works for the Ottawa Senators that that the Senators are going to select Jorian Donovan. So I'm kind of hoping that they do, because
sounds like they might
owe me. This person's going to owe me a dinner when they do, because I put that's what I put on the line here for Jorian Donovan.
Nice little lobster dinner.
Exactly, man. And again, he's in that same range of probably a third, maybe a fourth round pick is where you start thinking about him. Now, do the Senators reach and take Jorian Donovan because, he's the son of Sean Donovan? Maybe they do, but it wouldn't be the wisest choice. He's a left shot defenseman. Just to give you some details, he's a big guy. He's 6'2", 188 pounds, plays for the Hamilton Bulldogs. He put up 22 points, I think, in 64 games played. So he's not an offensive animal at all, but another guy who kind of safely projects as an NHL player down the road. And we're talking, 3-4 years down the road.
Pierre Dorian's son is also in the draft. Now, I don't believe he is slated to be selected. I think he's likely to go undrafted, but maybe in the 7th round, we'll see Dorian's son. I think he's with the London Knights, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I think he was at one point a member of the Frontenacs. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he could have moved. But yeah, he would be an afterthought to be a draft pick. No offense to Pierre Dorian's son, but I don't think, even in the top 7 rounds that he would be selected.
A player that I'd love to see Ottawa select. It's a little biased here. I'm a 67th reporter, but Brady Stonehouse. I mean, I love this.
Man.
I met him in person. He's a great guy, and he's bringing those pesky elements to his game that I brought up with Kemell, for example. I mean, Stonehouse, he's a good scorer. He played with Tyler Boucher at times, with Jack Beck at times. He creates plays. Every single time he's on the ice, there's something happening. And, we were talking about Claude Giroux. I don't know if this was in the video or before we were speaking, but we were speaking about Claude Giroux, and if he comes to Ottawa, he would really help out that second line, because he would help out that cycle in that line, the puck possession. Brady Stonehouse, especially at such a short stature, like 5'10", 5'11", he controls the play and he holds onto that puck and creates a lot of havoc in front of the net. This sounds like a Sens type of player. His name is Brady Stonehouse. That's an electric name too. Ottawa, get it done. Select Brady Stonehouse.
I'm actually a little ashamed or embarrassed that I didn't bring up Brady Stonehouse. Like, it was right there in the wheelhouse. I know you follow the 67s and you have ties there. And I don't know why I didn't think of Stonehouse, because he is a player that I identified as well early on in the season as a prototypical pesky Sens pick.
Oh, I'm telling you, he's going to be one of those late hidden gems. He's going to, if he goes with the right team, trust me, and he's a chirper out there too. When I interviewed Tyler Boucher, before their playoffs last year, he mentioned that he's never seen a player like Brady Stonehouse on the ice there. He just loves to chirp, 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 which is great to see, because as Sens fans, we're building a pesky team, the pesky Sens. Let's bring them back, and Stonehouse will certainly help bring them back. A couple more questions for you, Derek. I don't want to hold you up for too long, but 2 things. Firstly, do you see the Ottawa Senators selecting yet another goaltender in this draft? They've done so in like the last 4 or 5 drafts in a row.
I think so. I don't think they have, the depth in the crease area to get through the entire draft. And like you said, they have a lot of picks. So unless they're trading a lot of those picks, I think they will take a goalie. I don't think they're going to take one super early, especially this year. From what I've heard, and I'm not a goalie analyst, I'll say that first. From what I've heard, this is not the year to draft goaltenders. I think there's 2 goaltenders that people talk about. Maybe you start thinking about in the 40 to 50 range in Leinen and Brennan, I think, are the 2 goalies. One plays in the Western Hockey League, I believe. And I honestly can't remember where the other plays. I should be on that, but I'm not a great goalie.
We'll forgive
analyst.
you, Derek. We'll forgive you.
Thanks, man. And I think they do need to strengthen their depth in the crease a little bit. So I could see them taking a goalie. I don't think it'll be, one of the top guys though.
Merrilainen, you got Sogard, you got Mandalisi, you got, Forsberg obviously signed. You got, of course, Gustafsson. I mean, you got a lot of. I might be even leaving out a player or 2, but I think you got a good pool of goaltenders there right now. Now, obviously, if Ottawa's going to take a goaltender, like you said, it'll be later, 5th, 6th, 7th round overall. Yep. That's fine. If it's a 5th, 6th, or 7th round pick for a goaltender, whatever, take a shot. Who cares? But like you said, if it's in the top 3, 4 rounds, I think that's ridiculous. Like for a guy like Sogard, okay, you know what? I get it. That's what they did. They took him like 32nd, 33rd, whatever. Or no, they traded 39th overall, for Sogard. Right. And, at the time, trust me, I was not exactly thrilled about it. But now that we've seen him play, I've actually got to interview him. Great guy and a great talent. So that worked out. But once again, Ottawa certainly has bigger needs at play right now. But if they want to take a shot later in the rounds, let them do so. My last question for you, Derek. We've mentioned, mid-round guys that might go for Ottawa. Who are your hidden gems in this draft that Ottawa should definitely take a shot at before we end this video?
Yeah, I have a few of them, a couple of spicy ones that I really like. I'll start with my 2 undersized defensemen. One of them plays for the USN TDP. A lot of people are talking about him. And if he was bigger, he would be a top 5 pick in this draft. That's how out of this worldly his skills are. Unfortunately, he's 5'8", 147 pounds. His name is Lane Hutson. I still think, if a team is looking at him, I could still see someone taking him in the first round. He's that skilled. I mean, really? His skill is just insane. He puts up tons of points. He's got probably the highest upside of any defenseman in this draft. If everything were to hit well and he was to grow a few inches, which is a possibility, he has insane upside. But of course, when it comes to projectability, it's really hard to project a 5'8" guy in the NHL as a defenseman, especially. We know how hard that can be when we have an undersized guy in Brandstrom who hasn't quite, hit his stride. And the other undersized defenseman that I really like, that I have in my first round, because I think you can project this guy. He's at 5'9.5", maybe 5'10". So he's not as small. Over 200 pounds, though. He is beefy. He's like a truck. And he goes by the name of Ty Nelson with the North Bay Battalion. Oh, yeah. I think he's an outrageous skater. He just has, he even uses, he uses that tomahawk style sometimes, which throws defenders off. He's an excellent skater. He's an excellent leader. He's a guy that has a good shot from the point. He's going to be a power play quarterback in the NHL. And I could see him being a top 4 defenseman. So, most people have him outside the first round because of the height, but he's a guy that I would be very comfortable taking, starting to think about probably in the mid-20s is where I would start to think about Ty Nelson. And as a forward, how about David Goyette of the Sudbury Wolves? Like, he's a bit of a boomer bust player. He had 73 points in 66 games. He skates well. He has great hands, great vision. I would say an above average shot, but he's a really shifty player, and he plays with a real dynamic, sort of flashy style. So he's the player that, as I said, I have a real skill leniency, a skill bias. I also love Noah Ostlund for the same reasons. Both of these guys are similar in ways. They play the perimeter right now. They haven't quite figured out how to get to the middle of the ice and get to those scoring areas. But if they can figure that out, you're looking at a long-term prospect here of, 3, maybe 4 years of development, and then you could have a top 6 player. You could have a top 4 defenseman. So, those are the guys that I tend to go for in terms of home run swings. There's also the Russian factor this year, Brandon, where, that's going to be more prevalent this year than we've ever seen in years past. So you're going to have sliders. You're going to have Danila Yurov, who most people project
around that right now,
exactly.
Yeah.
Most people project him as a top 10 pick, but he's probably not going to go in the top 10 because, people are worried about the visa issues. People are worried about what's going on in the world and if he'll ever be allowed to join their team, even though he's a really projectable player and he has a really high end skill set. And then Miroshnichenko, who, had a real difficult health setback in terms of, being diagnosed with cancer and going through that this season. He was a top 3 pick entering the year. This is a guy who was getting comparables to Alexander Ovechkin. So you could look for him in the second round as someone, who you could take an absolute home run swing on. And maybe a team like Buffalo, who just has multiple first round picks, maybe they get him off the board early and get a player like that.
Well, Derek, that was a lot of information. I certainly have learned quite a bit. I definitely know a lot more now about the draft than I did before this interview begun. Everyone watching, I hope you did as well. Learned a little bit. Derek, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. You know so much. Of course, check him out at Future Watch, brought to you by Dine Sports. They do great work. Future Sickos as well. Make sure to check them out. Derek, thank you so much once again for joining the show. And I look forward to seeing what happens on Thursday night.
Same here, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Take care.